Welcome to the WUN series, a set of podcasts exploring issues in the utility sector with our very valued Women's Utility Network partners. Today, we are talking enabling net zero from customer behaviour to physical innovation. And without further ado, my name's Kerris Mackley and I will introduce our panellists. Hayley, would you like to start for us?
Hi Kerris, my name's Hayley Monks. I am co-founder of the Women's Utilities Network.
Fab. Natasha, I'll come to you.
Hiya, nice to see you and thanks for having us here. I'm Natasha Ackroyd. I'm the head of proposition focusing on the electrification of heat at E.ON Next.
Fabulous. And Rebecca?
So hi, I'm Rebecca. I'm a director at Baringa Partners. So we're a global management consultancy firm and I lead our work around greening homes and cities for Baringa.
Amazing. Thank you guys all so much for joining us today. We're really looking forward to our conversation on all things net zero. So to start off, first question, and Natasha, I think I'll come to you to answer this one first, but we want to look at what is the things that are exciting you in the physical innovation space, so technology. So whether it's real or imagined, what are the things that's going to be really transforming our sector from a physical technology perspective?
Oh, absolutely. So for me, I've kind of stepped into the world of heat quite recently, and there is so much going on in the world of heat that is just amazingly exciting. So with the fact that heat makes up such a quantity of our emissions that we need to ultimately start reducing for our net zero goals, there's a massive opportunity. But it's always felt like one of those really hard problems to solve. So I used to work in utilities a few years ago. And it was one of those things that people didn't really want to tackle. It was like too tricky to sort of, wrap your hands around it and really get into the grips of what would it take to solve the heat challenge. But recently I've come across a few really exciting and interesting innovations in the world, specifically around sort of physical innovations. And so one of them is, I don't know if you guys are aware of this, but E.ON has a power plant in central London. So we have a combined heat power plant right in the centre of Farringdon. So you step into our office and you go up to the fourth floor and there's essentially a power plant operation going on there. And then our E.ON Next offices are on the second and third. And anyway, I did a tour of the power plant the other day. And our power plant in central London is supplying heat, cooling and power to a number of amazing, buildings in the centre of London, new and old. And it's things like that that really make me feel like we can crack it in those urban high density population areas. So that was amazingly exciting. Like we have this hot water tank that is like 5 stories high. Like you go in and you're just like, how is this here in central London? It's amazing. So that in terms of sort of big innovation and how we will solve some of the high population density challenges that we see in the world of heat. But also there was a really interesting, they're quite early stage in terms of their funding, company that's really focusing on how you can solve the domestic heat problems and really build technology that works for the current issues that we're seeing today. So putting that consumer lens on it. So in the world of domestic electrification of heat, a big challenge is around space constraints. How do I fit this in a home? And also around that kind of disruption to the installation process. Now, this company, they're called Nasuku. They're really early on in terms of their development of their products. But they've designed essentially a new type of heat pump that really tackles those challenges head on, which is amazing. And it's innovations like both of those two that are tackling some really difficult problems that I believe will be pivotal in how we transform the way that we think and electrify our heating network and ultimately reach some of our net zero goals, which we won't be able to do unless we tackle heat.
I love hearing you talk about heat networks and CityGen. I think it's a great site.
Have you been?
Yes.
It's so amazing, isn't it?
It's brilliant. And all the buildings it serves, it's fantastic. And I think for me, talking around heat networks is critical because there's not a single solution for heat. And so thinking about often kind of the forgotten technology there, I think it's brilliant. We absolutely need to have more heat networks, and it's lovely to see that it's going to be regulated and the zoning potentially going to come in. So I think that's really key. I think for me as well, on the physical innovation side, it's actually what we can do with that technology. So we've got some really great technologies out there, but it's how you can continue to innovate and use them differently. So particularly for me around that bidirectional charge points, I'm actually being able to facilitate vehicle to grid and vehicle to home, and being able to use your car essentially to help power, send power back to the grid or to power your home. Brilliant, takes away the need for that home battery as well, and can help with some of the cost implications to customers. And we're seeing more models emerging, the OEMs bringing them to market, and a bit of cost parity there with the charge points as well at the lower end of the 3.5 kilowatts charge points. And I think we need to see much more of that. So I'm really excited about that side of things. And then just back on heat, around that kind of space constraints point that you talked to. For me, I really like the Kenza shoebox product. Finding a real compact solution for smaller homes and for flats, and thinking about, traditionally ground source heat pumps being seen as quite, large and bulky. And this is a much more accessible technology. And I think it's that continued innovation as we get, we grow this market, that's going to make such a big difference.
Continuing on the topic, we can't realise our goals without bringing these technologies and these things to people, right, and to communities. So moving on to the second question, I think, Hayley, I'll come to you for this one. Transforming customer behaviour is often considered to be quite complex, and how we bring this to life for people. What do you think will make the real difference in moving consumers and more broadly communities towards the net zero goals?
Gosh, this is such a huge topic as well. Because even if we take the whole utilities sector today as a whole, the customer base isn't massively engaged, and there's particularly low trust. And yet they're going to be absolutely fundamental to our transition to net zero. So I think there's a huge effort here. It'll be like having the best marketing team that you've ever had to market the products and services and understanding of them to get that adoption. We can't assume that the general public are going to get excited as these ladies are about the innovation, or invest their time to become as knowledgeable about them to understand them. So there's a whole series of things across the sector, including gas, power, water, hydrogen, heat pumps, whatever we do, to go right back to how we're going to engage the consumer. So right from the basics about education, understanding, and take them on the journey with us. And I think there's an element of also then really understanding what consumers want versus what they say they want. So there's been a lot of behavioural research and marketing research and polling that goes on, and asking customers what they want. And often people will say, yes, I want solar panels. Yes, I want to contribute to net zero. But actually, when it comes to making the decision, because of the cost base or lack of understanding, they don't do it. So I'm going to tick a box because I'm probably expected to tick a box. So I'm behaving in a way.
And also I want to be that person.
Yeah.
I want to be the person who ticks the box that says, I want solar panels.
Yeah. But then maybe don't go through it. And I think cost is going to be a huge thing. So what we've seen with smart metering is that a small portion of the population have become quite obsessive about smart meters. They understand it. They've got their apps. I mean, I have my app, which is independent of my supplier. So I monitor my usage and I can see it. And I think when you're talking about EV vehicles and them charging back to the house, all of that, it's kind of quite nerdy and quite exciting. So that's really engaged people, but will all the rest of it do the same to a broader population? So I think there's a huge education piece. There's a huge engagement piece. And for me, a massive brand and marketing thing that we have never invested or experienced in utilities before.
Yeah, actually, interestingly enough, I was at a talk a couple of weeks ago where there was somebody that had been instrumental in the rollout in Ireland of heat. And one of the key things that they said was very instrumental in that being successful in Ireland was the public campaign around education and the real investment in public services and, specifically focused on education, and that how instrumental that is. And I completely agree. You need to bring people on the journey if they are going to really willingly take part in the journey.
It needs to resonate with them. It needs to be in language they can really understand and feels normal to them. We talk about retrofit, we talk about green homes. That means nothing to the general population. Home improvements does. And I think it's that type of shift that we need to have in terms of our mindsets, as well as we try and get the rest of the population on the journey with us.
Yeah, and there's so much research in there. So I'm probably going back to pre-David Cameron with the nudge unit that they had, where they looked at why customers behave like they do when they were giving away free loft insulation and people weren't taking it. It's like, well, why aren't people taking free loft insulation? It's free. It's going to reduce your energy bills, make your home better. And some of the research that came out of that was, actually, it's a bit too much effort to clean out my loft.
And that's it. If it's not easy, you're not going to do it, are you?
No. So I think there's a lot of little sticky things we have to unpick to persuade and encourage the population to engage in these products. And language, I think, is going to be hugely important, because we need to talk in the customer's language.
I think there's also a whole host of tools that are starting to work towards bringing those two things together, whether that's behavioural science or whatever it might be, is that actually there are new and emerging things that are coming through that enable us to bring those together and start to talk in the customer language. And actually it's going to be so important that we use those tools to actually bring those two things together.
Yeah. And what could we learn from other sectors? So a lot of this has been done in health, in terms of food choices, particularly in schools. How food is displayed has impacted what children choose in the school canteen. So how do we take a lot of the things that are being done outside of the sector and bring them in to enable customers to make more informed and better choices?
So in the spirit of bringing things all together, how do we best combine all the facets of net zero transformation to achieve our goals?
Yeah, so I think it's multiple things that we've kind of touched on already here today. So there's the technical innovation piece. It's critical and really, really important for the net zero transition that we continue to have development and innovation in technology. So then I think the funding piece kind of enables that. So we're in the UK and we're in a really privileged position that there's loads of innovation funding. That's not very common around the world. And actually we have some brilliant minds and amazing people trying to solve these problems. So we need to continue that funding arm in the UK because we're going to then see these technical innovations. But then I suppose back to the consumer point, you have to bring them along on the journey and it has to make sense for them. So I think a really key piece of the puzzle is, yes, our government puts money into innovation. Yes, there are grants and things towards certain green technologies and there's certain funding available for certain consumer groups. But then you see in some of the sectors quite conflicting policy decisions. And therefore, from a customer point of view, it's really difficult to really get behind it, because actually you're like, oh, but is this really the direction of travel? So using the example of heat, sorry, I keep bringing back to heat. But, you've got a £7,500 grant that you can get and you can access towards the value of renewable heating solutions. But then also there's really high and quite strict planning regulations around installing some of these measures. And also, on the kind of like flip side to that, there's a massive spark gap in this country. So if you look at the rollout specifically of heat pumps around Europe, the countries that have done this really successfully have a very similar electricity and gas unit price. So it makes financial sense from a customer point of view. Whereas the customers that are looking to make these choices in the UK today, sure, I've got £7,500 off the initial upfront investment, but it's really hard for me to work out if I'm actually going to save any money with this because the spark gap is so large. And that's something that really needs addressing. As is, I think it's the worst in Europe. And therefore it doesn't really come as a surprise to me that we're not having the adoption that we need. So it needs to be a combination of all of those things, and they need to line up and make sense from a consumer point of view. Otherwise, as you've said, if it's not easy for me to understand, I'm not going to make that decision consciously.
And then I think that goes back to the regulators and all the bodies that are surrounding, because again, from a consumer perspective, we have got lots of different regulators and government entities and bodies that are either setting policy, setting direction, or certainly grabbing media attention. And that's not necessarily that well joined up.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, even if you just take heat and water, 60% of energy in the homes used to heat water. We focus on smart meters and net zero, but actually there's little focus on water because the cost of water is relatively cheap in the country. So how about a combined strategy, putting those together? So I am definitely not going to suggest an overarching regulatory body, because we don't need any more regulation, but we do need simplification of regulation and a more joined up viewpoint, across not just the regulator, but all of the other government bodies that sit across the utilities sector.
If you can frame it from what is the consumer problem, what is the consumer barrier, and then you can join policies into that almost, and then what needs to filter down into our different sectors to enable the solving of that customer problem. And it's just that customer lens that I think is probably sometimes missing in the joined up thinking.
There's definitely an element of cutting through the layers to create that really cohesive narrative, because but we can all get behind and we can get involved. And I think in the spirit of what Hayley was talking to a little bit, my next question, and Rebecca, I'll come to you for this one, is how can collaboration between companies, industries, different bodies, communities, how can we bring that all together to achieve our goals? And what's the really, really important thing that's going to drive that unity?
So I think first off, I'd say that collaboration is absolutely crucial. It's really needed to drive real, tangible change and amplify the impact that these different organisations can have. I think what's really interesting to sort of take a step back and think about is if we're to meet our net zero targets, we need to upgrade 2 homes every minute between now and 2050. I mean, that is a mammoth challenge. But if we get it right, the benefits of doing this are significant. So you could save around 6,000 winter deaths each year. You could reduce mental health illnesses, have a massive impact on childhood asthma. I think we'd see cases drop by around 650,000 again a year for that. The strain to the NHS is huge. And so actually that collaboration can reach way beyond energy. This isn't an energy problem for energy people. This is a problem for everybody. And I think we have to start framing it in that way. To get to our goal, we need for every £1 of government investment, we need around £3 of private sector investment. And so we need to really think, how do we work together? How do we make this, to the points we've been talking around, super simple for customers in what essentially is a really complex environment? So at Baringa, we often talk about this one-stop shop concept, where you take that customer journey end to end and you manage throughout, and you really do take those steps to simplify it. So from taking data, so things like your smart meter data, your supplier data, your banking data, geospatial, and use that to create tailored, personalised solutions. Help the customer to find their installer that's accredited, is going to be reliable. Help them fund that. So some people can finance that themselves, some people can use grants, other people are going to need a mix of things like subscription models that we're starting to see emerging. And then that in life support, how do I help them maintain that? How do I help them flex that asset to get real value and support the grid there at a point where we know it's going to become really constrained in the next few years? And so thinking about how to do this together is going to make a massive difference. And by way of example there, I think we're actually starting to see some of the banks really grow into this space. And a couple of the examples I really love is the work that Lloyds Banking Group have done. So one with Octopus Energy on their heat pump, and the other with Effective Home on their solar panel proposition. And what they've done is they're working in collaboration with these different partners to help them identify customers and help those customers on that journey to then go through that process and get those assets installed into their homes. I think it's more of that. It's more of that. How do we work together? How do we integrate our technologies so that they can talk to each other? going to have a huge impact, but we really need to focus on it, everyone playing their role and recognising that, we can't do this on our own. And see that with the work that E.ON are doing as well, with some of the innovation projects, how you work across the heat network sector and your heat pump propositions. I mean, that's what we need. We need absolutely everybody to be working together.
A challenge from, if you look at where we are today from a government basis and that move to a potentially view of UK PLC, because the investments required on one side and the benefits may be seen in another body. So you quoted the NHS there. It would probably, it doesn't want to save, but it needs more money. But if you could demonstrate by investing in homes and improving it, that it had an impact, they're two separate pots of money, aren't they? And I think so. Had you get the government and those bodies to see it as UK PLC from an ROI perspective, and not as individual funded areas.
And I suppose there's a project that's actually just come to mind on that point specifically. I don't know if you're familiar with the warm home prescription, but this is something the Energy Systems Catapult have been leading on. And it is just that. It is people can be prescribed based on their needs and based on potential, reasons why they might need a warmer home. Some of these energy saving measures. And actually it's a prescription from the NHS that then companies, E.ON, we're kind of looking at how we can launch this out to our customer base at the moment. But it's an amazing product and service that they've created simply by taking that problem of how do we join up funding in different areas and make it make sense. And they seem to have done a really brilliant job of that. So I'm really excited to see where that proposition goes
Super
over the next few years.
I think it's ultimately all going to come back to data, isn't it, in terms of the decision making and being able to understand consumers, what they say they want, what they are doing, how things are being used, how energy is being used, all the products and services. It's going to be a huge amount of data for some clever people to put some outcomes on.
That data point is so crucial. And I think what's really interesting is how, like you say, how you use that data, but how that feeds into the banks around, they think about the valuations and how much they can offer on mortgages. And a really interesting insight from Rightmove recently was they've looked at the most searched items when customers looking at homes. And heat pumps used to be the top 1,000 and it's now the top 500. Solar panels used to be the top 500 and it's now in the top 100. I mean, it's a little bit of a way to go to be, there with the driveways and self-facing garden. But it just shows the green shoots around how people are starting to value this and how that can feed then into the kind of valuation criteria and the lending criteria. And again, brings together all those bits of the jigsaw puzzle pieces and says, there's a picture on the box here. Let's all be working towards that goal.
Yeah, it feels like it's happening, but it's just not happening quick enough, I guess, is it?
And I think that comes back to, there's all sorts of different, and we've come back to the multifaceted nature of this, from behaviour, technical, to how do we bring this all together to unify and reduce effort, right? So actually this starts to get easy and this starts to be something that customers can pick up, they can run with and they can use. I suppose, and we've touched a few of these things, whether it's data or, obviously lots of industry bodies, but the kind of one question I have is, what challenges are we going to face in doing this? So it's a classic thing. We're going to overcome lots of challenges and continue to drive forward. But what things do we need to start thinking about to make sure that we're prepared to overcome these challenges? And also, what challenges are people not thinking about yet? What are we missing?
For me, one of the things, and again, we've touched on it today, is around trying to get, make this appeal to the mass market. And I think one of the things we're just not getting quite right yet is this is very conceptual. And we need to take it from something that's just perceived as really far away and make it really real for today. And I think that's our biggest challenge, is how do you appeal to the general public here? And it's not something new. We have done this before. We took plumbing and gas central heating into homes many years ago. I take it that, granted on that, but we have done it. And it takes that, collaborative effort to do so. And I think there's something around, kind of how do we start to address that, is we don't need to solve all the problems today So let's go to the low-hanging fruit. Let's create some scale in new build, for example. So hopefully the Future Home Standard comes in that stops gas boilers being installed and creating a retrofit problem. That can help grow the supply chain. It can help with product innovation and lowering costs. I think it's really about that focus today. You have an eye to those use cases that are coming down the line, but really kind of, really focusing. And I just also add, I think there's a point, so I touched on it before around that kind of grid network reinforcement point. I don't think we're doing enough to think about that today. That really is going to become a problem in 5 years, and we can't wait 5 years to address that. If I may, then I guess also I would say, we have got to think about installers and supply chain and maintenance of these products. And we know that's a real issue in social housing today as well.
Yeah. I think from my perspective, it's making sure that everybody is on the journey for this, because a net zero that doesn't work for those that are, perhaps in less advantageous socioeconomic situations is not a net zero that works at all, because you're going to leave people behind and then it doesn't work. It's not a success. It's, you can't just bring some people along on the journey and leave others behind. And that's where we will really struggle as a society if we don't make sure we include those people. And for me, I think a lot of people are aware of that, but I don't know if it's always necessarily top of the agenda items to make sure that those people are considered and really, that you're designing for everybody.
About being people focused and having that people centricity to really drive through lasting change, right? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it won't be lasting change unless we bring those that are the least, educated, the least, financially able along on the journey. It just won't work.
Yeah, affordability is a key thing, isn't it? Making it affordable.
Mm-hmm.
I think staying on the people element as well. When you talked about installers, workforce. So the Energy and Utility Skills Report says that we need 350,000 new people into the sector to be able to deliver some of the current plans that are there. And listening to what you guys have said, we're going to need more than that, aren't we? To do, because we've got to improve the pace on everything that we're doing. And added to that, there's over 100,000 that are expected to retire in the next 5 years as well. So, the challenges are numerous. Is there any unseen ones? I'm sure there are, as we lift a few more stones. And that's why I think it really needs probably a more collaborative approach, not just just from the regulatory, but from the industry, in terms of how do we affect some of the key challenges, whether that's around people or brand, and what's our joined up strategy on affordability. Because early adopters will get very excited about the technology, and where they can afford it, they're going to buy it. And that's what organisations want, because they're in business. We're all in business to make money. And so those people, we want those people, we need those people. But how do we save some of that to go out and help the people who maybe can't afford it? And one final thing, if I can, just on net zero. I think if you took a microphone and walked around the street and asked people, what does net zero mean? I don't think you'd get a really clear understanding. So the education piece there, if we're not all going in the same direction, we don't have the same narrative, we don't have the same understanding, we don't know what the solutions are to that problem, then we won't all be taking some personal accountability to do it. So I think it actually also goes back to the fundamentals of what does net zero mean for individuals in the country, and what can they do about it, from their own home right through to living, driving, working.
And tangible, like what can I do about it so I don't feel like I'm helpless in this?
A million miles away.
Yeah.
Exactly. Making it close, making it cohesive, making it clear. Amazing. And I suppose, one, thank you for a fabulous discussion, and just some final thoughts would be fantastic. Hayley, I'll come to you first.
I think my key takeaways is to not underestimate the size of the challenge, not underestimate the partnerships and collaborations that's needed to resolve it. And probably we need to, I think, picking up on one of your points, Rebecca, about maybe picking just a couple of things and doing them really well. We can't boil the ocean here, although we maybe, but that's where we're going maybe with climate change. But let's just pick one or two things and do them really, really well and make a difference.
I think I just really reiterate that point around working together, that collaboration, those partnerships, and having policy that's lasting, that we can have a bit of certainty in. I think is going to really help, because that's what the industry is looking for, to see that we're not going to keep chopping and changing, and we are committed to this as a nation. And I think that commitment will help drive the jobs, the growth and supply chain. I mean, you were talking about the need there around installers. Most of those people who are going to be installing these technologies are still in school. So again, that partnership, how do we work together, and then making it enforceable. So making sure that when we do have the policy, that we stand behind it. So things like the minimum energy efficiency standards in the private rented sector, making sure that we actually, do follow up on that. We check and we help those people who need it the most, and we look after everybody in society here.
And I think probably for me, I guess the majority of listeners and watchers of this podcast are going to be women that are working in the utilities network. So I think, the opportunities that are presented at the moment are huge. The challenges are also huge, absolutely. But there is so much opportunity in this space. And I think it's that, you as a woman that is working in this space, you have an amazing opportunity to really make social change, to really make lasting change on a global, impactful scale. And for me, that's just so exciting that opportunity has probably never really existed in this kind of level really before. And certainly when I talk to women in my network, it's sure, you might not quite know what the next few years are going to hold for you, but what we can really be sure of is that working in this industry, you're going to have some amazing opportunities to make real, lasting, impactful change.
And what a brilliant point to end on. Thank you so much, everybody, for your time. It's been a brilliant discussion. And thanks so much as well for watching the Women's Utility Network podcast series. For more information about WUN and what we have coming up, please go to thewun.co.uk. And also you can join our network there, see all of our events and see what's going on. Thank you so much.